if they don't earn X GPA this first year, then I won't pay for sophomore year. No, I don't want to do that. That's not a discussion I'd like to engage in. If there are specific majors that you're willing to pay for and not others. So we certainly have learned from students that their parents were not eager when the student decided to change a major, or that the students needed to earn certain grades. Certainly not passing courses would not be a great idea, but certainly when there are GPA thresholds that there are expectations. If you're not working, you should be able to maintain X GPA, which I've heard before. So again, if there are those kinds of stipulations, tell your student. What happens is they come back to my office, because we're the admissions office, frantically saying, can you talk to my parents? No, I can't talk to your parents about this. So we encourage, have some honest conversation, even if it's from a standpoint of when I was in college, these were the stipulations that were in place for me. It kind of starts the conversation. Are you thinking you're going to do the same thing with me? If not, if certainly there is some expectation of contribution from the student, working over summer, that there will be student loans, certainly having that conversation is important to have. And distance from home influences what that will mean. If you stay closer, we'll pay for it. If you go out of state or go further away, then recognize we have X set aside for you for school. You'll have to figure out the difference. Those are the kinds of conversations that, again, if they can be had earlier on, certainly students can realize expectations, versus I think sometimes we see students who will have even their graduation parties not realistically knowing that the party they're having isn't for the school they will be attending. They think they're going to one institution, but after the party, a certain conversation takes place saying, no, I think you're going to be a little bit closer than you thought you were. Responsibility for the process, certainly we get the frantic call from, please don't tell my student I called, but, and that's okay, I'm happy to help alleviate some of those nerves, but if it's to check to see if your student is completing the process, we encourage you to nudge your student. We are starting to collect parent information, so email addresses, and certainly are releasing what we consider generic information students. So just letting them know, hey, we're releasing decisions, or we've just released notification to your students about checking their status. So if your student has applied, they should have received an email that looked like X, so that parents can assist their students, but not log in and check the application. The reason that I'm saying this is because once they enroll on campus, most of the communication about business that needs to take place on college campuses now is done electronically. So if your student is not prepared to do that during the admissions process, it will still, they won't be enabled when they get to college campuses. We communicate with our students regularly through their campus email. And if they're not checking it, then they are out of the loop with their faculty and also with administration about business that needs to be taken care of, and usually by deadlines. So it's really important to establish that relationship as they're thinking about the college admissions process. It's also important as they're beginning to think about colleges and universities, because certainly many of our pre-college programs, including summer camps, we often send information through email. So as your students are registering for exams, certainly establishing an email they will keep and check regularly is very, very important. Location, if being close to home is important, certainly having that conversation up front. I remember distinctly saying something to my mom about maybe I would stay home, and her saying, no, you're going away to school. And she, away, kind of pushed away. And she said you have two options, college and the military. Oh gosh. And that wasn't even in my radar, that those were the options. In her mind, she was very clear. My dad just kind of nodded, yeah. So again, I encourage you to have those conversations, because certainly families have expectations for their students. It's just important to articulate them. Recognizing that fit can be important, first as it relates to competitiveness, but also individual skill sets. Where do you feel comfortable? Is a college campus size, in terms of one that's big enough for you, maybe a small size campus, relatively speaking, 5,000 students, rather than a college campus like Michigan where there are over 25,000 undergraduate students. Certainly making sure your student is comfortable there, but also gives themselves the flexibility to grow and maybe explore other areas, really important. So I encourage you to think about what is really a good size, and each of your students will have a different answer to that question. Thinking about the individual process, and then really the education experience is individual, very much, and that you all should explore it, again, not necessarily in a group, because certainly I know that a lot of students and their friends start talking about their choices and think, well, if my friend's going there, I want to go there as well. Often we need to think that would be a great place for me to visit. We can visit each other. We don't have to go to the same university. Making sure that as you're thinking about the communication with your students and offering support and guidance, but also pushing, again, as I mentioned, the push-pull of how do you motivate your students. Some parents, it's going to be registering for the information session. For some parents, it's setting a deadline and saying, I need you to set the college business up, and it's by X date, and really encouraging your student to do that independently. Certainly, each of you will recognize within your own student which of those tools would be most helpful in helping your student move along to the next phase of the process. And what also works for you and your family at this time. Certainly, there were points with each of my nephews that I've been able to see, my sister would motivate one very differently from the other. One, she registered, the other one, she set a deadline, and there were going to be penalties if he didn't meet it. For each of them, that was met very differently. So again, for each of your students, what will work for them will be very individual. But again, encouraging that process to move along in the junior year is crucial to what will happen in the senior year. Acknowledging your students' viewpoints, whether it's I'm excited or I'm a little afraid, but also kind of taking a little levity with it. Look, they're going to go to college. They have great preparation, a lot of choices. So settling themselves on one particular college or university certainly puts a lot of pressure on a student, and there are some things that are not within their control. Certainly the choices they've made in terms of courses certainly is within something that they've had within their control. Doing the best they can in their coursework, certainly something they've had input on. But once it's been submitted and they put their best foot forward, the college or university will make the selection decision. And so again, helping students to transition, we have many choices. And then once we have admission to those colleges and universities, making a good selection is certainly something that I think each student feels very good about as they hear that there are choices and we're going to move forward and it's going to be a good choice. Agreeing on a timeline of when things will happen. Certainly we're hearing more from families. We're waiting to hear where my student has decided to enroll. There hasn't necessarily been a discussion, or we're waiting on Twitter to see where the student announces they've made that decision. Certainly if that works for your family, great. But I also recognize that in this process where parents are contributing to the financial part of this equation, that certainly families should be included in the how are we making this choice. So I encourage you to actively engage in a discussion so that it really is a family decision. Supporting students in their independence, whether it's talking to guidance counselors, whether it's visiting campuses, interacting with faculty individually is also important. And then I also encourage you to start deep breathing. Junior and senior year is all about the deep breathing. And then the more you do it, the better you can feel about kind of letting go. It should be a good process for students and their families, but it's just a transition. The timeline, so your students are well past freshman year, establishing those study habits, recognizing your areas of interest. Sophomore year kind of breezes by. They initially start to take on some testing, get a good sense of where they stand. Certainly they may have visited some campuses through some summer camps, but also starting to get an idea of, what's it going to cost to go to college? By junior year, as you can see, that list grows. And this year, really the testing, the alphabet soup of tests, exploring those scholarship opportunities. Some of the things your students have been involved in for very long periods of time will now have scholarship application and implications for your students. So certainly that's important. Taking more serious college visits, certainly that can be important, but we hope that students and parents aren't visiting with bated breath. Is this the right school for me? Versus we're going to go and look, and hopefully it's, this is someplace we're interested in or not. But certainly trying to place those visits around things that might be a social opportunity, whether it's a sporting event or a cultural event that you're interested in. Take some of the pressure off to just go and enjoy the campus as a destination rather than a college decision. Strengthening that academic curriculum and putting forth your best effort in focusing the junior year, really key. If there's ever a year where a student can say, I'm going to really kind of cut back on maybe some of my extracurricular activities or try to focus a little bit more academically, junior year is the year to do it. Senior year can be a little late, simply because we often can't wait for those fall semester grades to make a decision. So it's really important junior year that students are given the opportunity to make some changes, to make some priorities more important than others. And sometimes if those are academic, certainly we encourage it. If it's one or two clubs or organizations that they have interest in and the other ones not so much, perhaps narrowing that list can be okay junior year as well. We're looking for sustained and consistent involvement. So sometimes, one or two organizations rather than that 5 or 6 are just fine, simply because your student is continuing with the things they most enjoy. Summer work, as we talked about, whether it's something that may be an enrichment opportunity or an academic opportunity, can be important. But again, colleges and universities don't necessarily look at a college course taken on a college campus as more important than a student who maybe took on something that was a community service project over the summer that they really enjoyed and then were able to talk about in their essays in the application. So keep that in mind. Versus taking another course that we've been able to see their academic record. We can see how they perform. So it's really about what else they can talk about in that application that gives us a better picture of who they are in a very three-dimensional way, rather than simply they're a great student with great courses and they've done great work in those classes. There's also an opportunity for narrowing some of those choices, finding colleges and universities that just don't work, that aren't of interest, that you thought it was one thing and maybe it's not the right move, maybe it's not the right interest area, maybe it's not the right location or size. It's okay to make choices junior year and say that's a priority. Senior year becomes kind of narrowing things down. We certainly recognize that high schools are providing more online opportunities to their students. And what we say is if there is a deficiency in terms of what is provided at the high school that you're interested in and is provided online, certainly take advantage of it. But because we are a traditional brick and mortar university, we encourage students to take courses brick and mortar, so face to face, because certainly that's how the bulk of our instruction takes place on our campus. That is not necessarily the case for all universities. So I encourage you, as you're talking to universities, to find out how they feel about online learning and what is their policy as it relates to undergraduate coursework. Many schools are expanding their online learning opportunities for their students. We haven't. Our faculty are somewhat resistant. They want to touch, feel, talk to their students. They want them physically in the classroom. They want them to be involved. So again, as it relates to their methodology, their thought is, no, face-to-face is still really important to us. Supplemental instruction is really what they're thinking about as online opportunities for students. And they're somewhat reluctant to post their lectures until the end of the semester because they want students to show up for class. So that's important to recognize that, a university that says they really want their students to participate and engage, how might they do that and how are they using technology to enhance those opportunities for their students? Senior year is also an important opportunity as it relates to thinking about submitting those applications, getting them off the plate before really things get hot and heavy in the fall of the senior year. Because certainly once those applications are submitted, there is a little bit of a downtime in terms of starting to focus on other things, transitioning to college, enjoying some of the things that senior year brings. Whether it's getting involved outside of the classroom, enjoying some of just those last things, whether it's the last school dance or the last fall, whatever it might be. Those things can be very important, and honestly, the sooner you can complete those applications, the faster you can move on to some of those opportunities as well. As you start to think about the application process, we encourage students to think about colleges and universities and the academic reputation of the institution. What will your degree do for you, and how does it really match up with your area of academic interest? We recognize that academic reputation for an institution is the #1 item that students use to help them make decisions, and that's through our national organization. They survey thousands of high school seniors every year, and they continue to say academic reputation is the #1 reason they choose an institution and the #1 reason they don't select an institution. They also recognize the fit with the admissions requirements, so how closely a student aligns with what the school indicates they're looking for as they're making a college admissions decision.